Hello, my name is Khyre Edwards. I am running for United States Congress in Maryland's 4th District. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about my platform. If you go on my webpage at KhyreEdwardsForCongress.com, you'll see that I have a pretty extensive policy page, and it's broken up into three sections: stabilization, affordability, and liberation. I think that we need to stabilize our country before we can move forward. Obviously, the American dream is no longer affordable, and we need to dismantle our empire in order for us to move forward as a country. Today, I want to talk to you about stability. I don't think anyone would look at the news or maybe even look out your door and think that this country is stable or that this government is stable. We have ICE agents in the street killing unarmed protesters. We have Donald Trump calling for those same ICE agents to patrol voting stations in order to intimidate voters and steal an election. We have the National Guard mobilized in blue states and just there, loitering around outside of business fronts, intimidating people. We have Donald Trump saying he wants to steal elections, and he already stole a president. We're supposed to just, forget that happened. We have Donald Trump claiming that he wants to do the same thing he did in Venezuela to Cuba and Iran, and wanting to send us out and to fight for his policies in other countries. You have Donald Trump just stealing money from different agencies. Last week, he's sued the IRS, saying that because someone partially leaked his tax return about 4 years ago, that he should be able to get $10 billion from the IRS, which, reminder, that's our money that he's just taken in his quest to become the world's richest person. We don't like to talk about it, but January 6th did happen, and it was at Donald Trump's behest. He ordered his followers to come to Washington and overthrow the Capitol so that he could stay in power, and it failed, but not through any effort of his own. And once those people were finally hunted down and arrested, Donald Trump, first day of office during his inauguration, pardoned them. And then he went and hired them and put them in ICE, and those are the same people patrolling our streets and killing us. So, before we can do anything else, we have to bring some amount of stability to our country. Otherwise, it's just going to keep getting more violent. And it's not just violence against, people that I like. It's also people, I don't really care for, but it still shouldn't be the go-to to try to assassinate a presidential candidate 3 times, or kill a high-profile YouTuber and Charlie Kirk, or show up at a judge's house threatening to kill them, or attempting to kill Nancy Pelosi, or succeeding in killing some state officials in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's just getting more and more violent, and I think that we should take cues from dystopia, not just pretend that we don't have agency and we just marched forward towards things that writers have thought about, like The Handmaid's Tale, which the Republican Party seems to think is a handbook or a how-to manual. I want to remind them that it starts with a militia allied with this shadowy religious group coming in and machine gunning all of Congress. It doesn't seem like they left many of them alive. There were some who maybe were joined in the movement and just joined the government of Gilead, but that's also not fun. Not a great government to have. And you might just be like, oh, that's just a story. That can't happen. Why? We have too many guns in this country. We have too many people that have them. We have people that have already tried to do the same thing and were stopped. January 6th, part of the plot that failed was some of the Proud Boys and the Proud Boy leader, Enrico, Enrique, I can't remember his name, but you can go look him up. had weapons that they brought into the Capitol and got caught, and there were also some people that brought explosives and set them outside of the RNC and the DNC headquarters. And thankfully, they didn't go off. And Donald Trump claims to have caught the person years later. I feel like possibly not the right person, but we'll see. Because if it was the right person, I imagine Donald Trump would have pardoned him already. All that to say, this is a very realistic scenario that we should be doing everything that we can to prevent. We should be lowering the temperature. We should be changing government and giving people, we should give American citizens some measure of confidence that things can be solved nonviolently. Because if not, people are going to remember that violence has been an effective tool throughout American history, and is how a lot of action has moved forward, like it or not. So I think it's important to talk about what we actually do when we win the House back in 2026. And we should be honest, a lot of the work over the 2 years will just be staunching the bleeding. Donald Trump has done a lot of harm to this country. And honestly, before him, Joe Biden the last 2 years didn't do a whole lot. Republicans did have the House, so there's that. And we couldn't pass a whole lot. But even before that, it was Democrats, not Republicans, that were gumming up the works of government. And we like to blame, the Senate, specifically Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. But, there were plenty of other people, as we've seen over the last year, during Trump's first year and his second term, that, just roll over, The House Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, is one of those people. Hakeem Jeffries did, marginally better than Chuck Schumer in a lot of those fights, but, he shouldn't be skating by uncriticized either. So we can do a lot more, but from 2026 to 2028, a lot of it is just going to be rolling back some of the damage to government that Donald Trump did, and trying to lower the temperatures, and trying to, remind America that we can have better things in preparation for the 2028 presidential election, where we can usher in a new age and push forward some, radical change that we greatly need. But we should still try during the next 2 years to push through some big stuff. Donald Trump doesn't have very solid views on a lot of policy and can be influenced, and some Republicans also agree with some of us on some policies that we're sometimes surprised by, especially around the affordability and economics part, and government reform. There's a lot of Republicans that talk the talk about rooting out corruption and draining the swamp, and so maybe we actually push them on that. Maybe we actually say, oh, yeah, I agree with you. Some of these people have been here forever, just collecting a paycheck, and also trading in the stock market. Maybe we should stop that. That's fine. So some things that I think we could do. Take some notes. Now, this is all on my website, and I will be making a shorter version of this if you don't want to watch this long, in-depth version. But I did want to make a long, in-depth version for those who like video and audio and maybe don't want to read through all the policy stuff. I do want to give the disclaimer that some of the things just by virtue of space on the internet. It's not fully fleshed out on the website. It doesn't mean I haven't thought it through, or that I don't. And if there's something that's not on here, it doesn't mean I don't care about it or it's not a priority. It's just some things are timely and that we need to get started like yesterday. And some things are things that I think just need a little bit more attention. So if you have questions about something you may not see, A, look through all of it first to see if maybe I just have it in a different section, or maybe you're looking for something and you're like, oh, I really want to know your thoughts on packing the court. I'm not sure I have that on here. I have judicial reform, but just spoiler alert, I don't have super strong opinions about it. I think if we had 11 justices, that would fix some of our problems right now. But I think larger fixes are necessary going forward. But if when we take over, we're like, let's have 11 or 13 justices in the code bending law, that won't keep me up at night. And again, in the short term, I think that would change some things. I also think I'm not running for the Senate, so moot point, but I think we also may disagree on who would fill those seats, because I personally think that we have, even the judges that we put on the Supreme Court or appeals court or circuit courts are still the same flavor of judge, and there's nothing in the Constitution saying that the Supreme Court justices have to be judges, and we just haven't explored that as much as I think we should. I think we could have some people, like Republicans are going to say that we have activist judges no matter what we do. We could actually put activists on there. Some people that don't believe in the death penalty would be my preference, and some people that want to push on some of the, I'm getting ahead of myself, but want to push on some of the settled case law we have around, the right to counsel. Like we all have the right to counsel, but still, right now, it's not a right to effective counsel, or it's not a right to actually be able to meet with your lawyer for 3 hours days before your hearing. It's still okay, legally speaking, for you to meet your public defender 5 minutes before you talk to the judge and they convince you to take a plea deal, and that's just not justice. Anyways, getting ahead of myself. Also, I want to say on the website, there's not necessarily an order to these. I do think there's a priority, and there's some things that take longer, like multi-year efforts, and some things like we do it and then we're done, or at least we don't have to talk about it for a while. And so, have that in the back of your mind as well. So, anyways, first thing we need to do is government reform. We need to change how our government works and streamline some things so we can so we don't have so much time taken from governing and making laws and convincing Republicans in the House that we're right, or convincing the American people that Republicans are wrong, and trying to get them to change their views on stuff. We spend a lot of time just voting on stuff that people don't care about all that much. One example, again, running for Congress, not the Senate, but that being said, it is a big time suck and a big waste of time for every time there's a empty spot in the cabinet or as a department head, for that spot just be vacant for sometimes years. There's some spots that a president never gets to fill because a vote never comes up to take up the appointment that is nominated for certain positions. And we understand as American public that that wouldn't be okay for Department of Defense or um, Department of Agriculture. You'd have like farmers revolting if they didn't have a representative in that department. But some departments that never heard of or that we don't talk about at a dinner table, sometimes they just never get their position filled, and it's not like no one's leading them. It'll usually be whoever's a temporary appointment will just be there, and they're not legally allowed to do certain things. I think we should just automatically accept who the president nominates, and if there's a specific issue, like they failed their security clearance investigation, or they're currently being investigated for a crime or something like that, then yeah, have a hearing, look into it, whatever. Set up some timelines where you have to have a hearing or they automatically get approved, because that's just a big time suck, and the Senate doesn't want to give up one of their constitutional powers where they have advice and consent. I get it, but advice and consent isn't supposed to be we get to hold this position open forever if we don't have a hearing. That's honestly how Mitch McConnell stole the court seat. Um, so we changed that to make it some timelines where the Senate has a certain amount of time to either have a hearing, have a vote, or not. And if they don't have it, then the president should reasonably be able to surround himself with who they want. And if we don't like that, then we should just change the Constitution and make it where it's only public officials that this is their career. But that's not what we're willing to do. So just let them have it. So we do that, remove a big time suck, and then we can actually focus on legislating. I will go through some of the stuff quickly, and then there's one thing I want to focus on. We should limit how much super PACs can spend per cycle. We need to have some legislation against Citizens United. It's ruining democracy. You shouldn't be able to buy elections. What Elon Musk did with like his lottery in Pennsylvania was just wrong. Shouldn't be able to do stuff like that. So we need to legislate that. We need to ban use of AI in political ads. It's already out of control right now. We can kind of tell if AI is being used, like Jasmine Crockett's race, or really the Republican primary. They had this weird ad with her dancing with the Republican senator, and I guess that's supposed to be bad or whatever. But it's just like AI. It's like her face superimposed on someone else's, and we shouldn't allow that. Like eventually, deepfakes are going to get really good, and we're going to have some weird, sticky situations, especially with audio. We should just ban the use of AI in political ads. It's not fair. We should probably regulate AI and other ads too, but specifically in political ads, get rid of it. We should similarly put a ban on polymarket or similar betting type deals. Specifically, members of Congress shouldn't be able to use them. Members of Congress, the president, Supreme Court, and their staff, and possibly some of their family members too, if they live with them, possibly should be able to bet on the poly market things. Why do I say that? You might be like, that's weird. Donald Trump a few weeks ago did some bet on Venezuela that he obviously could influence because he knew he was going to invade the country, and allegedly so did Marco Rubio and some other people, and they made quite a lot of money on decisions that they got to make. And the same for members of Congress, if they, can bet on where the next Olympics is going to be, but they sit on a committee helping decide where we're going to where the U.S. is going to propose it should be, and the U.S. gets to make quite a lot of decisions in the Olympic Committee. You may notice that we've hosted it a few times, and we usually don't have it at places where we don't like, or at least don't benefit from. So do that. And then there's We should have a ban on all stock ownership for Congress, their staff, president, judges, and by judges, again, federal judges, not just the Supreme Court, but appellate courts and circuit courts. They also have a lot of power, just not quite as much power as Supreme Court justices, but pretty close. And they decide a lot of things, and they have a lot of knowledge that the public does not have. Congress, in particular, is the most offensive one because they're in charge of regulating the markets. But the executive is not much different. All of the departments that regulate the markets, like Treasury, for example, but also like the SEC, they are also under the president. The president gives these memos and gets to influence the market. But Congress is the one making the laws. They're the ones meeting with a lot of these people. They have massive staffs and can investigate things, and it's just not fair if they are also, making money off of all this. Okay, so we banned them from owning stock, buying stock, selling stock. Once we pass the bill, we can have like a 2-week to a month period where they can sell off the stock or gift the stock. They cannot gift that stock to their wife or their son who lives with them or anything like that. That's silly. If they want to gift it to charity, that's fine. Otherwise, just sell it. If they lose some pennies, well, pay corruption tax. They knew better for quite a long time. There's been other bills, and I think the last, 4 Congresses to ban them from trading stock or selling stock and all that. And so they've had plenty of time. My proposal is just we add some teeth to it, and we make it broader, so we don't have these loopholes where we can pick on her since she's no longer going to be in Congress. But Nancy Pelosi may not be able to trade, but if her staffers still can and they're sitting in those meetings, that's still not okay. So just ban it. They'll be okay. Also, we should increase congressional pay and have a system where it's either automatic or there's a process where it comes up naturally so that people aren't fighting about it every time it's snuck into a bill or something. They aren't starving by any means, but they do have some expenses that everyday people don't have to have, that sometimes they can just pull from their campaign accounts to pay for security. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they can get reimbursed for travel, and sometimes they cannot. And then even if they can get reimbursed for travel, if it's not full, I've personally had jobs where you get partially reimbursed for like driving, and it's just like definitely different than if I made $176,000, but making $30K, it was a lot worse not being able to get fully reimbursed. They are public servants, but they're doing a pretty big job, an important job, and they should be rewarded for it. Hopefully they don't stay there for 30 years, but they should reasonably be expected that they can pay their bills and feel good after they're done working in Congress. So we increase their pay, and then, possibly more important, we restrict the types of income they can get other than their congressional salary. Obviously there's going to be some who are older and they can get a pension, or they've worked at a place and they have their previous 401k, which should also be regulated. But they shouldn't be able to be like landlords or be the CEO of a business, a for-profit business. They shouldn't have somewhere where they can be corrupted and have too many things pulling them away from their actual day-to-day job that they were elected to do. And also, we shouldn't have to worry if they're passing this defense bill because they own a defense company, or if they're blocking the minimum wage hike because they have a chain of hotels in West Virginia, like Joe Manchin did. Just stop that. And not just for Congress, but also, again, you'll see a theme: federal judges, the president, the vice president, and their staff. Yeah, that's just what we need to do, and those are things that we can do, like, in a day. These aren't complicated things, and it's things that everyone pretends to agree with. Maybe less so the income part, but you know, I think they will be popular, and it would be a show of goodwill to the American people that people aren't in this for the corruption. They're in this to make America better, and it's what Trump claimed he was running on, to drain the swamp and all that. So we should force the conversation, and it should be more than just a conversation. People can do it, and people don't need to wait till the law changes in order to stop manipulating markets and stop being corrupt. Glenn Ivy, if you're watching this, you can at any time stop trading stock. You can sell your stock off today, and we can just stop talking about it. You should also stop being a landlord. We've already talked about AI a little bit, but AI is a problem. Maybe one day it'll be the technology will be good enough to justify its use, and we can make it so that it's not just an energy suck and it's not super polluting. But right now, it's not there. Right now, it's just another white whale technology that we're like, oh, hopefully this can solve all our problems, but we haven't quite figured out the technology part. We haven't figured out the regulation part. We don't know where these data centers are going to go. Hint, poor black neighborhoods, like always. And we don't really know who's responsible for cleaning up the mess that they cause. We should figure that stuff out before our government invests in all these things, and before we pretend that it's going to solve any issues, let alone all issues. We should reserve the rights to water and energy to the community first, then businesses, including AI. Data centers should have to pay rent to the communities that they're in, and make sure that any pollution that they may bring, they're responsible for cleaning up. That's the air and the water and the land. Anything that they destroy, they have to clean up, and we need to bring that back for oil and coal companies as well. But right now we've been talking about AI, and that's where the federal government's putting way too much money into. They should also be paying the costs of energy and water to the community. If they're using more water and more energy, and the people who live around the data centers see their electricity costs and their water costs go up, then of course the data center should be responsible for paying the difference, and maybe even a little bit more to justify them being there. Right now it's like, oh, these are going to bring jobs, and the taxes will be enough to justify it there, and we can use that money to hopefully do this thing. And it's a bit circular and trickle downy instead of just direct pay to the people that live there, and that's how it should be. And then products that utilize AI have to let the consumers know which part was AI. Again, deep fakes are a real problem. I saw AOC, and I apologize, I can't remember. I think she co-sponsored a bill, possibly with a Republican, but she showed up to Congress with Paris Hilton and to raise awareness about deep fakes and the danger of them and why we need legislation. And yep, 100% agree. So yeah, we need to regulate that. And advertisements, art pieces, books, social media posts, the consumer should just be able to opt in. If they want to buy a book written by a computer, they should be able to buy a book written by a computer. But if they don't want to buy a book written by a computer and want to support actual writers, they should be able to do that. And social media posts, we shouldn't have, we should reduce the likelihood that violence can happen because somebody made a deep fake of somebody cheating on their wife or something. It's already illegal. Revenge porn is already illegal, but we can always add to those laws just to make sure people are on the same page. And also just to make it less difficult to do, or more difficult to do. The first thing we need to do, government reform, and the quickest and most pressing part of that is to make it less corrupt, and then AI regulation and reparations to the community where they reside, where data centers reside. Green New Deal. There's been quite a few bills around the Green New Deal, and then there was the hoopla around the um, outline that they came out with, and Fox News immediately took to deriding it because they summarize it as the left just wants to ban cows, and that is just silly. It's silly for two reasons. A, it did not say we should ban cows. It just pointed out the obvious that agriculture is the biggest cause of methane in the community or in the ozone. And also, the transportation of livestock is a big part of why we have so much CO2 pollution. And also, the runoff from nitrogen rich fertilizer is quite an issue for polluting local water and restricting how much water we have for just drinking water. Makes me thirsty. Eating more meat means we have to grow more livestock, and that means farmers and corporations have to buy more land. That means we have less land to do things like build houses, public green space. It's a lot of growing, the big crops that we're subsidizing. The subsidies are wasteful because we're growing things that people would eat anyway, like wheat, sugar, corn, beef. Are four of the things that we're subsidizing. And it's just like, why? We also pay farmers to not grow too much of certain crops because we want to keep the prices higher. And, there's a slight environmental reason to it too, depending on where in the country you are. We don't want them growing so many strawberries if there's not a market for it and they just rot in the field. But then we also, at the same time, insure farmers in case that happens, or if there's, a drought or bad storm or anything where they can't actually deliver how much, strawberries in this example that we need. I have the opinion that we shouldn't do both, but in the grand scheme of the Green New Deal, we definitely should regulate agriculture. But the Green New Deal would not ban cows. How would you even do that? That wasn't the proposal. And then if you just think about it logically, it was ridiculous that we couldn't move forward because Republicans had a pretty funny and easy to, remember a series of attacks saying that we'd ban cows and you wouldn't be able to fly anymore. You can't fly now anyways. You can on a plane and the planes can fly, but whatever. We're not superheroes. But it was pretty easy to just sit down and explain to people that, hey, in the short term, we may have to change some of our behavior so we don't all die. And so that, honestly, the cows don't all die if we don't change, if we don't respond to climate change and it gets hotter. Larger livestock are probably going to face mass die-off and disease, and we're not going to be able to eat burgers anyway. And I would be really sad because I really like burgers. I like burgers, I like wings, I like pizza. I have tried to go vegetarian or at least meatless Mondays several times, and I'm not great at it. I can do a meatless Monday, but more than 3 days, it's like, I would be sad. That being said, we should still do a Green New Deal. And we should focus the bill that I spoke to my heart the most was the Green New Deal on housing that I believe AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar wrote. Apologies if they wrote a different bill because there's quite a few. There's one on school, there's one about the ocean, and the ocean and housing ones are the ones that speak the most to me. The affordable housing one would basically add some more social housing options and also some more green space where people can grow their own food, have some community gardens, plant some trees. If you don't know, in lots of places, it gets really hot in the summer. DC, Maryland, I know everyone here complains about the summer. I love it, honestly. But there were some days in the last couple of years where it was so hot that, it was deadly. And Florida has lots of those days, but it's also by the water. And so there are some pluses and negatives to that because you don't always realize how hot it is. And some people die of heat exhaustion really quickly, especially if you're older. You have pride in taking care of your lawn and you cut your grass every Saturday for the last 40 years and you go outside and today's just a day where it's just too much. You didn't drink enough water or it's just hotter than it's been because it's getting a little bit hotter every year and you pass out and no one finds you. And, being able to build some shaded areas, just growing some trees, helps a little bit with that. Being able to educate people on, just changes in behavior would also help with that. So those are some practical things with the Green New Deal that you would see. One other thing, because it's timely, Donald Trump kind of dismantled President Biden's Climate Corps idea, and the Climate Corps was kind of a revitalization of FDR's civilian corps that went around and worked on a bunch of projects. They dug ditches, helped build the Hoover Dam, helped bury power lines, and do all this stuff that's just like seemed random and unrelated, but it put a bunch of people that didn't have work to work and paid them a pretty good wage. And people knew lots of the people that, like, everyone knew somebody that was working and on the projects, and so it felt like the government was doing something because they were, but people could feel it and see it. And so the idea with the climate course, the same thing, except, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep bashing Biden, but when you suck, you suck. He took this idea and then he didn't really do anything with it. He, partially due to, his age and his misunderstanding that just because he was once the youngest senator doesn't mean that he was still the youngest person in the room. And maybe he didn't have a full understanding of the need because he had obviously been a senator for a really long time, then a vice president, and then a president. And he was a little bit removed from the day-to-day. And so great that the wages were not the federal minimum wage, but the $15 minimum wage that he had pushed to be, or at least pushed a little bit, to be the new federal minimum wage. However, if the goal was to put a bunch of people to work and pay them a living wage and to do stuff for the American people, I think it should have been a little bit more money, maybe $20 an hour, and the projects need to be more visible. I was very interested in the climate course, and I could not tell you what they did, if they did anything. And I tried to follow it, I subscribed, I looked at the application. I know a few people who applied for it but didn't get picked. So, but what they could do, if they were around, is all the snow around DC or Maryland or Virginia. If they had mobilized as soon as it stopped snowing, like the next day, and they helped clean the sidewalks and the streets, and maybe before salted roads and salted sidewalks and stuff, work in conjunction with the cities and states, I think we would find that would be very, very popular and very helpful. I think people think of like climate change as like this weird abstract thing that's happening in the sky and maybe the oceans, but not something that's affecting them every day, every second of the day until there's like a storm. And so, every city has like some kind of crisis response team. Some counties have really good ones. You and some have ones that can be a little inconsistent. Prince George's County is a little inconsistent. Sometimes it feels Prince George's County, where I'm at in Maryland, it feels like they overreact. Like I've had to come and pick my kids up from school because there's a flood warning, and part of me is always just like, wow, Florida would never, but also maybe Florida's just less responsible than Maryland is. And even though there hasn't been a single time where I've picked up my kid because there's like a little bit of rain where my area has flooded, but also having lived in Florida, I did look to see if the area I moved in was in a flood zone before I moved there. So grain of salt. But there's that, and I'm not the only one that has that complaint. But then there's also when there's a legitimate issue, a big storm that we had about 2 weeks notice for. It just felt like I know there was preparation, but it didn't feel like it from the outside. You could see some places were salted, some places were not. Some places they had pre-positioned resources for after the storm, and some they had not, which is not a hard thing to do, especially given that the county owns plenty of land, plenty of places, just, free advice that you didn't ask for. But, kids weren't at the schools anyway. Traditionally, in lots of places, especially Pinellas County, they have like the crisis center, and then they have the schools that, you could use for homeless shelters if you need them. But if they're empty, you can just use that as the command center and pre-position some of the snow plows and stuff there. Prioritize clearing the schools and all the public areas that people are going to be. Then clear the roads. Let people know when it's safe to drive. Y'all did a very good job, Prince George's County and Maryland and Virginia and DC, telling people that this was a dangerous storm and to stay off the roads and such. That was very good. DC, now y'all could have done a little bit better about telling people that you were going to ticket or tow their car if they were in a snow route. I know y'all think that the little signs that no one can read are enough. They're not. They're only enough if you're born and raised here. I promise you. Even if the signs are bright red and you're like, of course this is a snow route. Hey, some of us didn't know what that meant when they first moved here, and I've been here for 5 years and now I get it. But because it's just like, all right, cool. This is a snow route. What does that mean? Anyways, little tirade over. The Climate Corps could be very instrumental to filling in the gaps for the crisis response that counties have. I don't think they should be leaned on completely, but I personally think it's inappropriate to expect neighborhoods to just clean up themselves. Like, sidewalks are public good, and they're owned by the cities that they're in, but the expectation is that the renter or the property owner is going to clean a sidewalk in front of them, and that just causes so many issues. And also sometimes the street in front of them, and that causes more issues. Like, again, y'all gave some very good notices. Baltimore in particular, y'all's mayor is great at communication, very funny, very smart guy. And I watched some of those videos where he very kindly, very straightforwardly told people not to put the little lawn chairs out in the to mark the spots once you cleared it. And then I definitely saw that in my own neighborhood and also around the streets and everything. And I get it. And I also saw some people get into fights over the park, like physical altercations over the parking spaces. But they are public roads, and I feel like people would be less likely to fight over them if the city just cleared the spots faster rather than having 3 spots cleared on the street. And there's already not enough parking here anyway. So a Green New Deal would be helpful in that aspect too, because part of it is about revitalizing public transportation and de-emphasizing the need for cars. part of it is also about electrification and putting more research, and I'm adding to it a little bit here, but putting a lot more research into the battery technology to weatherize it and make it easier for simple things like your car. You should have a reasonable expectation that your car will start even when it's cold or when it's hot. Hot weather and really cold weather can drain the battery faster, in case you did not know. I do not have a hybrid car, mostly because I don't want to get stranded, but I'd love to have a hybrid car or an electric car. But I've had the opportunity to drive them plenty, and my experience were, yeah, you know, they work great on a nice, clear, sunny day, and in places where there's like a college campus or a city that's thought through where they should place electric chargers, that aren't just Tesla chargers, because Tesla's still trying to corner the market and you can't always use the Tesla chargers. They just won't fit, or you have to have a membership or whatever. And then I've been to places that haven't really thought that through, and if your car dies and there's nowhere to charge it, that just really sucks. So, Green New Deal, and make it local, make it prominent, make it so that everyone from elementary schoolers, because you've put money into the schools to green the schools and grow community gardens, to, people in retirement homes, because you've done the same thing to retirement homes, know that the Green New Deal improved their life, and you just keep adding to it until the problem's solved. And Maryland in specific, we have the Chesapeake Bay, and we should definitely add something about, greening our waterways. They'll change that language so we're not talking about algae. But we need to make sure that it's clean, make sure that we can still, have oysters in a pretty good ecosystem, and it's not being polluted. We're not having developers come in and take part of it, all that jazz. We should increase research into renewable energy and weatherizing homes, and we should also have some requirements for states and cities to do their part. It shouldn't just be a big federal enterprise. Another one of the critiques that seem to make people stumble, even though I don't get why, because I don't know, was the price. But the price tag, even if you take the most crazy estimates, it's like in the trillions of dollars. But that money wouldn't just come from the federal government, and it wouldn't all be at once. It would come from businesses, individuals, cities, local government, and states. And if we worked with other countries, it would be even less. Like if we had a regional climate plan and stop bombing our neighbors and such, it would also be cheaper, because they could do some of the research that we wouldn't be doing, and we can have a technology share and agreement, because if we solve the energy problem but no one else can use it, we all still die. So I like being alive and think that we shouldn't let climate change take us out. So maybe we, work with Cuba and Haiti and Venezuela and Mexico and Colombia and Chile and Brazil, all the places, Canada, to come up with, a regional idea on transportation, on agriculture, because we're not the only country that can grow fruits and vegetables, and California is just not the best place to do it. They have plenty of land. A lot of it's in the desert. Florida has plenty of land. A lot of the soil's not good. Texas has plenty of land. Same thing. A lot of soil's not good. A lot of it's in the desert. A lot of it's been taken over by oil interests, and it's just it's not good. And you obviously have Middle America that grows plenty of food, but winter is a thing. But we have South America, where we already import a lot of the food anyways. Just a better place for growing some of the crops that we grow. We've already given up like coffee, and we import some sugar. And I'm not saying we should still have lots of local gardeners and farmers, and we should put more money into that. I'm just saying Cal- California is subsidizing the almond market every year, pistachio market, and then we just have to go without anytime there's like a fire is unsustainable and bad for the environment and annoying for us that like pistachios and don't like $30 chocolate bars when the Dubai chocolate craze takes off because pistachios are energy intensive and water intensive, and California is not the best place to grow them. So, anyways, there's a lot more that we can do with the Green New Deal. And you can look up more on my website, but you can also look at, um, all the climate.org, Sunrise, Sierra Club, some others. They have their own proposals, and then there's already been proposals in Congress, and I'm saying we should do those and more. And some of the stuff that Biden talked about, we should have just done and not wait for, like electrifying the buses, putting more money into electrifying school buses and all the postal trucks. Um, they waited too long for like contracts to go through, and then he kept the postmaster general that Trump appointed in power, and just too much, like too much. All right, moving on. Modernizing government and preventing shutdowns. So I already talked about speeding up appointments and vacancies for executive and judicial branch. We should definitely do that. We should create and update a process for virtual voting for members of Congress, especially the ones that live off of the mainland. I think it's unfortunate that Alaska and Hawaii has representatives and senators that have to either choose to live here full time or go back and forth, and it's just a really long flight. Same with people on the West Coast, honestly. I would be even kind of annoyed if I represent Florida and wouldn't be able to be there all the time. For me, if I win this race, it's a pretty easy commute. And so that is one of the more attractive options, and also honestly why a part of the reason I'm disappointed in our representative, because you're here, you don't have the excuse that you have to travel back home and meet with constituents and stuff. Your constituents are here, and a lot of them work in DC, and so I do expect more from the people that represent, most of Virginia. Virginia is a little bit bigger than DC and Maryland, so there's that. But Maryland and Virginia and even some like New York and Delaware and Pennsylvania, they don't have the excuse that some of the other states have, and not having town halls, not being able to meet with the constituents, not being able to understand what's going on in their communities, and also showing up for their job in DC every day, or at least every week. But we could easily use some of the processes that we had during COVID, and make it so that people can still, parent their children, show up in the community. I have the hot take that, sometimes it's better for a member of Congress to go to their kids' football game than sit in another meeting about technology they don't understand. We had more members of Congress, and then maybe the absences would be felt less. But also, if we had virtual voting, then you could just show up 9 to 5. I know it's not necessarily a 9 to 5 job, but follow me. Most of the hearings are in the morning anyway. You do that, and then you log off and you take your kid to their soccer game or their football game, and you're in the community. Not only just being seen and on photo ops, but you're actually in the community and you're invested in it and care what happens, and you're invested in your kid, and that has better outcomes. So I think that's a reasonable thing that we can do, and I think it'll keep people, wanting to be there for the right reasons, not just for the corruption. We should also do what we can to get rid of shutdowns, such as having an automatic budget that kicks in after 2 weeks, ending shutdowns so that the most shutdown can last is 14 days. We could do some other stuff too. Like we can have laws written to kind of like Obama tried to do, just without cutting Social Security and Medicaid. Because why? That wasn't fully his fault. That was the proposal. But we could just have budgets that just keep going at the same level, and then people can vote to change it at different times during the year. But there's no reason that we have to every year come up with 16 different bills that are usually pretty similar to the last year. Um, and obviously there's some changes and stuff, but you just do the budget in January, and then you legislate throughout the year, and then you just do the budget again in January, and you can talk about it throughout the year if you want. And if there's something that comes up, like a flood in Ohio and FEMA needs extra funding, then go ahead and do that. Though some of us would argue that possibly maybe you just fully fund FEMA to begin with, and then you don't have to worry about these emergencies. And if they don't use the money, they just carry that over to next year, because we're going to eventually have a flood in Ohio, or a hurricane in Florida, or fires in California. But we can reduce our expenses and reduce how often that happens if we pass a Green New Deal, and um, guard against that, reduce the instances, and also, you know, um, green our economy better and make it more difficult for those things to happen. But automatic budgets, but also, in the meantime, something that again I think we could do on day one. We should have guaranteed wages for government workers during shutdowns, emergencies, and strikes. Um, I think it's crazy that we use people as bargaining chips in any regard, but specifically the people that work in government. They're just doing a job. They don't get to make decisions about the budget. Most of them, anyway. They should just get paid. If Congress can't get it together, um, they shouldn't be punished for it. And if the worst that happens is they get a 2 month paid vacation because people are babies and can't figure out how to legislate, then that should reflect on Congress, not the workers. And then same thing during emergencies. Right now we have it to where, um, no, not to be doomsdayery, but I watch TV. You watch TV. You see things like Designated Survivor, or any of the dystopias and stuff, or you've lived through America and seen COVID. We don't want people's paychecks to be at the whim of how people feel that day, and if people can get together during an emergency. Just make it automatic if there's COVID, or if for some reason, say January 6th lasted more than one day, say it lasted 2 months, there'd be bigger problems, but we should still be able to pay workers. It should just be automatic. And then strikes, we we do a lot of there's some representatives that pretend to be more into unions and strikes and alternative ways of communicating workers' needs than they actually are. And DC in particular, and then the federal government specifically, have a lot of carve outs for workers' rights. Um, it's part of the reason that DC should be a state, but there's just a lot of rules that apply everywhere else except for the District of Columbia and our territories, and then federal jobs. And there's some jobs where it makes a little sense, like the military. There's sometimes where, all right, you the right to bargain is nice, but not while you're being shot by the Taliban. Okay, I get why that makes sense, but pretty much for everybody else, they should be able to strike and still be paid, and it'll be pretty effective for pushing through some of these bills. And there are some, like I said, there's some organizations and so some departments and stuff where we'd have to tinker around the edges because we do want our government to work, and we want strikes to be fairly rare. Um, Hopefully, because things are working and the conditions are already being met, not because people would starve if they go on a strike. So modernize government and prevent shutdowns. It's also just embarrassing. Embarrassing for other countries to see that we're shutting down every 5 minutes and can't decide on like things like, the deficit rising, or we reach our debt limit, which is just made up. You know, we can make that automatic too. And if we really want to reduce expenses, then we got to bring in more income, and we have to stop going to war. Shut down some of our expenses, and right now our expenses are war, climate change, and fascism are the things that are pretty much driving us off a cliff, and we can stop those anytime. We should abolish ICE. There's no saving it. It's a fascist institution that has duplicative functions to other police agencies, of which we have too many. We should talk about restructuring Department of Homeland Security as well. The current representative sits on that committee, and I am a little bit disappointed that he hasn't proposed some of this stuff himself, since he is a bit of an expert on it, having been a prosecutor and worked on some of these issues his entire career. But he still seems to be under an impression that if we just give them the right amount of training and ask them politely to take off their masks, that things will be better. And it won't be. They're an agency that routinely ignores the courts. The courts have given plenty of admonishments, but they, can't do a whole lot else without the executive's permission, really. They routinely ignored Obama's and Biden's directives. They are a little bit too happy to kill people in the streets, for my taste. And like I said at the beginning of this video, Trump filled them with a lot of militia that are personally loyal to him, and that's not good either. So we should ban those people from being able to get jobs in the federal government to begin with, so that once we abolish the department, they don't just go and work for another federal policing agency, because that also wouldn't be good. We should split ICE's budget and temporarily increase the budget of the U.S. Marshals, FBI, and DEA for arrests and transfer of undocumented immigrants who have already committed a crime. And by committed a crime, I don't mean crossing the border. It's not a crime. It's an inconvenience, and we should fix our immigration process. There's also one of the bullet points here. But I don't think these organizations should focus on immigration, because it's not where our priority should be. It's not really an issue. But the U.S. Marshals is already responsible for transporting people that are have been convicted of a crime to and from incarceration centers, jails, prisons, detention centers. They're already the ones that are supposed to, if someone's has a warrant out for the arrest, they're already supposed to be the ones going after some of these people. Same with the FBI. If someone's like on the most wanted list, that's the FBI's jurisdiction, and they would ignore ICE already anyways. They might coordinate with them. If I'm currently in DC making this video, but if you're in DC, sometimes you'll see a DHS van pull by, and you'll see somebody in an FBI vest, and then you'll also see the U.S. Marshals and the local police all coordinating to arrest one person. Seems like overkill to me. Waste of money. When we said defund the police, we meant that. It's, police departments just have far too much money, and then they waste it. Honestly, they're not paying their people. That's not where the money is going. It's going to buy tanks. I was actually passing one of DC's Metro headquarters, the one across from on Bladensburg, across from the hotel. And I saw them just like pull out on like one of their like anti-riot tanks, and I think they were probably just going to put gas in it or something, because they just turned on the lights and moved it from one part of the police station to the other. Whatever. I don't think they were going to send into a neighborhood that day, but it's a little bit chilling to see, anyways. So with that in your mind, like, I already think police departments have too much money. It's not just something I think. It's, you just Google what the NYPD's budget is, and then compare that to like the military budget of Kenya, and might blow your mind. Um, they already have enough money, but acknowledging that if we are going to be in a period of time where we are having them do things that ICE was doing, just at a higher um, um, incidence, then they probably should get some of the money. And then the rest of that money should go for victim services, and immigration services, and to hire more immigration judges and speed up the process. We should modernize the immigration process and focus on people who have valid asylum claims and temporary protected status, and offer them citizenship. It's weird to me that like we will have a temporary protected status for like a whole group of people for like 20 or 30 years, and then someone thinks it's just okay just to remove that and kick those people out of the country. They've already been here, they've been working, and I think even if they've gotten in trouble, it should be a case-by-case basis depending on what trouble meant. But whatever, if they haven't gotten in trouble and paid into the system, just make them a citizen. They're already American. They're already here. And it's regional anyway. Haiti's not far away. Like, why wouldn't we just want to keep those people here? You know, they bring something to America, culture and history, and a resilient spirit that we should enjoy. And we can do a lot more to partner with other countries in our region, and stop. We can do our part to stop messing up some of those places, so that we can have stable neighbors. Because the fact that they're unstable is mostly the U.S.'s fault. We've toppled a lot of leaders, and some of the ones that remain, we made a lot more paranoid, and they've cracked down on their citizens, mostly because we keep trying to kill their leaders. And if we stop doing that, then maybe they'd be a little bit less cranky. Maybe, we just do more stuff. We obviously should allow local governments and individuals to prosecute ICE agents and sue ICE agents who have committed a crime. And we should limit the Border Patrol's jurisdiction to 25 miles from the border. Right now it's 100 miles from the border, and that's just crazy. They're just randomly in towns well away from the border, and sometimes harassing U.S. citizens, sometimes not. And we also will need to restructure them and give them new priorities. But we definitely, within the next 2 years, need to limit their jurisdiction to 25 miles from the border. And that's a reasonable and realistic thing that we can do. And that's what I mean when I say we should abolish ICE. Get rid of it, fire every member of it. The people that were pardoned for January 6th, make sure that they cannot work in any federal agency, specifically the police agencies, and make it more difficult for this to ever happen again. Skipping around a little bit, we should definitely ban nuclear weapons. This is more of a long-term goal. We will need to work with other nuclear powers to achieve this, and make sure we all do it at the same time, so we're all safe, and work with powers who could either easily make a nuclear weapon or already have a nuclear weapon that we just don't acknowledge, like Israel, and also possibly Iran and North Korea. Though Iran clearly doesn't have a nuclear weapon, because they probably would have used it last year. And we can work on safe ways to dispose or repurpose the stockpile. they did have a program, Project Plowshare, I think, or Operation Plowshare, um, where that was kind of the thinking behind it. But by repurpose, at that point, they thought that they could use nukes to like speed up construction, and that's not what I mean. I mean, we should put the money that we've traditionally put into trying to blow stuff up into nuclear fusion, since that still has not been achieved, and that would solve a lot of our energy issues and be great for the environment and great for just stabilization. Um, in the short term, we should just re-enter and make new um, agreements. We had the New Start and New Start 2 that was mostly between the U.S. and Russia, and we walked away from that, and we should, go back into that, lower the tensions and lower the chances of having a nuclear holocaust. um, we should do a lot in response to the Epstein files. There's some stuff that we can do directly, like obviously prosecute the people that we can prove committed a crime in there. And personally, I think that we can, at least publicly shame some of these people at the very least, and chase them out of office and chase them out of power, and make it clear that we're not okay with that. This is kind of more of a signal that it wouldn't directly fix that issue. What I think we do need is a children's bill of rights, but I think that that should be a collaborative effort. I feel like Republicans might not be operating in great faith with this, but they keep offering a parents' bill of rights, and I, as a parent, think that parents have plenty of rights, maybe too many rights. Honestly, I think the state shouldn't be able to just come in and take your kid for no reason. But it's actually really hard to lose your kids, even if you're an abusive piece of shit. It just is, and sometimes that works out. Sometimes families get it together, and sometimes they don't. So my possibly hot take is parents probably have the right amount of rights, if not too much, with their kids, even in conjunction with school. I'm always surprised when parents are upset that the school didn't tell them something that their kid didn't feel comfortable telling them. Like, if your kid doesn't feel comfortable telling you that they're gay or trans or using different pronouns, then that's a you problem. I am fully confident that my kids would tell me any and all of those things. And if they didn't, maybe I'd have some hurt feelings, but that doesn't mean that we should, ruin everything for everyone else. But short of that, because we're not in a place to, I don't think that that should come from one person. I think that should be a collaborative effort. Everyone parents differently. And again, it's not parents' bill of rights; it's a kids' bill of rights. But I think kids should be included in writing that. But part of that should be banning child marriage, which is still strangely legal in quite a few states, and even some states that recently have changed it have loopholes in it. I just think being 18 at the very least to get married, it's kind of a no-brainer. We want to push people to finish their education. That's not the primary purpose, but we just push people to finish education and figure out life before they choose whether they even want to get married or not. Having a system where you can get away from being prosecuted because you married your victim is just not good. So we change something like that, and then we focus on prosecuting the people in the Epstein files, and a children's bill of rights would be my preference. But we can definitely clear the low bar of banning child marriage and making a federal ban. And again, it's somewhat symbolic, but it is still legal in some places, and shouldn't be. We should restore reproductive health care rights nationwide, and Code Row, make it legal and make it easy, cheap, possibly even free to get reproductive health care. Sorry, blinking on the name of the medicine. I can spell it, but blinking on how to say it. Mifepristone, I think. but legalize mailing of abortion medication, contraceptions, and hormone therapy, and emergency contraceptions. Um, it shouldn't be that difficult. Some of these things you might need a doctor to help you with, and some, you know, you don't. And there's a mismatch between the people trying to shove AI down our throats, maybe not the right thing in this context, and the people who are saying that we shouldn't be able to just be able to order our Plan B and mail it to our house same day. It seems backwards. Like they're like, on one hand, they're like, we don't need humans to do some of these basic functions like surgery. And on the other hand, they're like, oh, we definitely need a doctor and then like 10 people in the room to sign off on this for you to take a pill um, to, complete an abortion. And that's just a mismatch and dumb. And I get why. Like, women are the thing here where it's just like, we want to oppress women, and so we want to take away rights. And I don't want to oppress women. I think women should have rights and think they're people, which apparently isn't universal. We should so we should expand the house. There's nothing stopping us from doing this on day one either. It's not in the Constitution. The Constitution lets the House actually decide how big the house should be. You can't restrict it more than we have it now because they have it to where every state has at least one, and then it's supposed to be loosely tied to population, but that's mostly something we've decided. I think we should increase it by at least 100 seats. And that's something that we can do, but haven't done in about 100 years. And since this is the 250th anniversary of America, it seems time to do that. There's some representatives who have districts that are just like far, far too big. And there would probably be a fight about where those representatives would be. But, probably in the most populated states makes the most sense. If Wyoming increases their representative from 1 to 2, that wouldn't greatly offend me. But I don't think Iowa should get like 8 more. I think it should go to New York and Texas and Florida and California and Washington and Oregon. The most populated states. Maryland's in there somewhere, but I don't think in the top 10. Maybe it would be fair to focus on the states not on the mainland, not for all 100, of course, but Hawaii. There's a few islands. Alaska is pretty geographically. It's pretty big. It might make sense to give them more representation so they can reasonably actually meet people without incurring too much cost to themselves. I feel like there's a fair way to do that, but the easiest way would definitely be by population, so that every time there's this new census, we don't have to worry about if California's going to lose 2 seats to go to Texas, or New York's going to lose 4 seats and give them to Florida. Because even if 1 million people leave California and go to Texas or go to Florida, California would still be the most populated state. And, we should recognize growing population in Florida and Texas and such, but not at the detriment of the states that are still more populated or still like in that top 5. Those states should still have the most representation because that's where the most people are. I have the crazy take that the representatives should, reflect the area, and they should actually represent the people. And if there's far, far fewer people in a place, and they get fewer representation. But I do recognize that having one representative is kind of crazy. So there's that too. Congress has the authority to make this change without changing the Constitution and should just do it. And I think where people get stuck is on the number. I think 100 would be easy and uncomplicated, and I think would still be able to fit in the building. But if not, that virtual voting thing that I mentioned earlier would be pretty helpful while they do construction to figure out where everyone's going to sit. And most people don't show up to their jobs every day anyway. But they should build in some work-life balance and such, and be a good example. Um, we need some electoral reform. I already mentioned ending Citizens United, ban unlimited donation limits from corporations, and some people will push back saying that we would need a constitutional amendment because it was a court decision. I don't know why people think that, because there's been plenty of court decisions that the Supreme Court has done that we just legislated and got around that, until there was another court decision that like overturned the previous one. Like the way that Supreme Court precedent works and their decisions work is, yes, they can say this is unconstitutional or this is constitutional or this is what this means, but then they leave it up to Congress to like work around that. And so what they said is, they basically said corporations are people and people have unlimited speaking rights, but people don't actually have unlimited speaking rights. And important in that, they equated cash to speech, and so we can't limit cash because we can't limit speech. But the U.S. Congress limits speech all the time on lots of different things. Like we punish corporations, for example, for not limiting violent speech, and that's why YouTube got pretty ban heavy whenever people start saying certain words, or you can't say certain terms on Facebook, or if you can't yell fire and cry to theater and stuff. And there's simple everyday stuff like the school system would definitely expel your kid for saying certain words. So I don't know why we pretend that we can't change rules or limit things or make it more difficult, or at the very least have like different reporting requirements, because there's nothing in that decisions that says that we have to let that speech be private either. It's very easy to make a change saying that you can't you can have as much speech as you want, but you can't just hide it. And so we can definitely change that. And if it leads to more um, if it ends up in court again, then that's fine. Whatever. There's plenty of people that's their only job. Like, if the ACLU is fighting another Citizens United case instead of, I don't know, doing something less popular, then that's okay. Plenty of money will come in. We can have that fight. We may be able to change stuff, and you might be like, oh no, Trump's judges will just deliver him another win. It's like, maybe. Do we know that Amy Coney Barrett is for unlimited, corporate speech, or does it depend on what that speech is? Because I don't think Republicans fully like it either when they're on opposite end of that. Anyway, we can limit spending from PACs and super PACs to a set amount per year. Again, same with Citizens United. People just say we can't do that, and so they don't try. But we could definitely say we already have been given the authority to set what that limit is for individuals, which is crazy. Somehow there's not that Citizens United decision didn't make it so people could give unlimited amounts of money. So there's that too. Automatic voter registration. There's a bill in Congress right now, the SAVE Act, that Republicans are pushing to make it harder to vote. And I think we should just do everything we can as Democrats to make it easier to vote. You actually have to have two different philosophies for voters to pick between. And if you don't have another philosophy, then the stuff that the Republicans propose seems common sense, and they have reasonable questions like why can't we, force people to have an ID, or why can't we force people to come in to vote? And if you don't have an answer, then the bills just pass, or states just do what they want. And so I think we need to go another way. And the answer to that is we already require people to bring IDs. What Republicans want to do is to make sure that you have a specific federal ID, like your driver's license. But what if you don't have a driver's license? And sometimes they allow you to have things like your NRA, registration license, or membership license, but not your student ID. And so they do things to make it easier for people that they assume are their voters to vote, and less easy for people that think will vote against them to vote. Like college students, a lot of times vote Democrat, and so Texas makes it really hard to vote on college campus. So I think automatic voter registration, you're automatically registered to vote, a month before you turn 18. And I'm sorry. And fun fact, if you are scheduled to turn 18 before the election, then you can vote in that election. And sometimes they don't like to advertise that. But in some states, the registration deadline is like 3 months before the election. And so sometimes there's like this weird thing where people in between those can't vote or don't think they can vote. And so just automatic voter registration gets rid of that problem. And gets rid of the confusion and gets rid of conversations to convince people it's like, no, really, you can vote. You can go register now and go vote, and you can register before you turn 18. You just don't get the card and don't actually you're not actually allowed to vote until you turn 18, unless you're in the military, and there's some exceptions around that. I have a national voting holiday. We just have a federal holiday, second Tuesday in November, where it's accepted that you can just take off work and go vote. And if you have to work that day, they have to pay you extra and all the things. Ranked choice voting, which some people still aren't sold on, and I don't know why. I've talked to some progressives and some community leaders, and they're like, oh, if we had ranked choice voting, then that would mean that the Republican would have won, or this person would have won. I feel like that's magical thinking, and you don't know until the election actually happens. So that would be my first argument. But also, even if the Republican won, that just means more people voted for the Republican, and that's democracy, and you just have to have a more convincing argument. I think ranked choice voting, which if you don't know, basically you get your ballot. Let's say there's 5 candidates on there. You vote for your top one, let's say it's me, and then you vote for your next 4, like in order, and say I don't get enough votes, and so it goes to the second person, and then it just keeps going, and you just keep going until you have a clear winner. So even if your person only gets a few votes, the next person you get is still counted. Or if something happens where you put all this time in voting for someone and then they drop out after it's too late to take their name off, stuff like that happens too. I would greatly like ranked choice voting that's not party specific. We just have open elections, so we don't have closed primaries, so you don't have to worry about registering for a party or switching your party registration. You might look at it and be like, hey, I usually vote for the Democrats this time, but I actually like what this guy in the Green Party or the Socialist Party or the Working Families Party or Democratic Socialist America Party is saying. Or maybe you think the Republican is better. I don't know. A lot of times people stay in power because we'll have closed primaries. They won't advertise that there's even a primary, and very few people participate. And the people that do participate are like the super voters, and a lot of times the people that always vote are older, and a lot of times older folks will want to vote for a name they recognize. And so it just keeps some people in power a lot longer than it should, given the amount of things they actually do. So ranked choice voting would fix a lot of that, honestly. We should also lower the voting age to 16. Everything I said before would not require a constitutional amendment. Again, some people disagree with me about Citizens United and say we would need a constitutional amendment, so whatever. If we were going to do that anyway, we can put it in the lowering the voting age to 16, which would be my next proposal. I think it's as previously mentioned, I think it's crazy that we just don't give kids many rights and a say or authority or protections, and we just kind of are like, hey, go to school, do this stuff, and then eventually you'll be able to, have a voice. And right now the magical number is 18, but it used to be 21. Um, but a bunch of younger people were returning from war in Vietnam, I think it was. Um, Once they were able to actually vote, they campaigned to lower it to 18 because they thought they should reasonably be able to vote if they were being sent to war. And that is very reasonable. You don't actually have to be 18 to be, to go to basic training. So there's that. I think you still have to be 18 to be sent to an active combat zone. But if you graduate at 17, you go to basic, you do the training and stuff, and then the process might take a year, and then you're 18 before they send you to a combat zone. I think it's kind of how it works now. But they're also in the schools recruiting throughout from ninth grade on, so they can call you as soon as you're eligible. And then there's some other like military boarding schools and stuff that you're definitely not 18 for. So that's the logic. We should be able to lower it a little bit more, but even taking the military out of it, it's not like you don't have thoughts and you're not a fully formed person, which I was playing a little bit, at 17, and then you turn 18 and you're magically a fully formed person. And I think we should reflect that. Now, when I say fully formed person, I just mean that kids are still people, and they are obviously growing, and they obviously need to be protected, and obviously shouldn't be treated like little adults. That's not what I mean. But they should have a say in the society that sometimes they understand more than we do as grown-ups. Like, I haven't been in elementary school in a really long time. Gwen Ivy hasn't been in elementary school in even longer. But if one of us wins, we'd have a say in how elementary schools are run, which is fair. But even if we weren't running, we get a say. We get to vote. We get to show up at school board meetings. We can run for school board. We can vote. We can yell at teachers, I guess. Without any consequences. You can send whatever email you want as long as you're not threatening anybody. I promise you I've done this. And, you get a nice, sometimes nice, response back because they see that you are a person that votes on their salaries, can make a fuss, and you're respected by virtue of your adulthood, no matter how educated you are or uneducated you are, what your job is. If you call the school with some caveats, they pick up and they have to answer your questions, however silly they are. They don't have to do that with kids, even though the kids are there, and even though the kids see the results of policy. An example, some of you may have kids and ask them what they do every day and talk about lunch. Comes up every day for me. I don't know if it does for y'all. My kids hate school lunch. They definitely have some foods that they look forward to and that I would never make them. Like I'm not gonna make them bagel pizza or Mexican pizza, which was one of my least favorites growing up. But also, I can make a pretty good burger, and apparently the school cannot with the budget that they're given. I know it is a money thing, but I know that because I work in food policy, and I definitely counted on free and reduced lunch and breakfast, not only during the school year, but during summer camp. During summer, I went to summer camp, and I got free lunch and breakfast, and if I didn't, we would have starved. And so I know that from experience, but I don't know. I'm far removed from school, and if I don't choose to pay attention to the policy, there's no reason why I would know it. But the kids don't get to choose whether or not to go until 15 or 16, when they can legally get parents' permission and drop out or drop out on their own. And we should just have a voting age to reflect that, and some other things like some some stuff about work policy. The kids start working, or can start working around 15, 16, sometimes lower ages, depending on the industry in the state. And they don't have any kind of representation and votes. And when I say they don't have any kind of representation, like, of course, there are elected representatives and they ostensibly represent kids too, but you have to be at least 25 years old to be a congressional representative, and 30 to be a senator, and 35 to be president. That's far older than 16. I don't think a 16-year-old should be president. That probably wouldn't be a good idea. But I don't know why a 25-year-old can't be president. It's just arbitrary numbers that we came up with based off of the lifespan of our founding fathers, which was far lower. It's higher now. We could figure something out that works a little bit better and is a little bit more representative. But lowering the voting age to 16 is something that would take a constitutional amendment. So we'd have to travel around the country and convince people. But I don't think it's as difficult as we make it sound. I do think it's more necessary than we seem to think, though. I am almost done for today. I want to quickly go through one more, and then there's two that I want to dive in a little bit more. The judicial reform, I already kind of talked about some of this, but we should regulate the type of income that judges can get as well. Ban them from being like things like landlords, ban them from owning stock, reduce the type of gifts and assets that they can receive and have. This would get rid of the problem of, Clarence Thomas getting a yacht or being able to have his house paid off by a donor or take plane rides or whatever. The plane ride thing, I think we would have to sit down and talk about who that applies to, and also regulate personal flight to begin with. To me, that wasn't the most offensive. I do think it's offensive if you also sit in on those cases, which was part of the problem. But the physical gifts that you get and vacations and stuff are an issue. And then just basic ethics reform. And like I said, the court packing, I'm open to and not against. It's just not something that I think is the start and stop of the conversation. I think if we pick an arbitrary number, I think it being odd makes sense. You don't have a bunch of split decisions. But when we only had 8 people on the court, stuff still got done. So I'm not totally sold that it has to be an odd number. But if we did 11 or 13, though, slightly superstitious, so I guess we should do 15 instead of 13. And I'm partially joking and partially just showing that the numbers are a bit arbitrary. I don't think we should shrink it, but I'm open to that conversation. I just am not fully sold on what the number should be, or that would solve all the issues. I think as I previously stated, that in any regard, we should probably nominate some people that are a little bit better on criminal justice, abolishing the death penalty, things of that nature. Maybe some people with some lived experience. Maybe we should get someone on the court that's actually been impacted by the criminal justice system, and we'd have to think that through and make sure it wasn't organized crime or something like that. We don't want any issues to arise from that, them still being part of a criminal enterprise. But I don't know, if they spent 3 years in prison and they got their life together and got a law degree and know how the system works, that seems like useful experience for the court to have that they currently do not and have never had, to my knowledge. The last two are criminal justice reform and gun violence prevention. Gun violence prevention, I think, is a lot easier than you've been told. I think there's a lot of agreement on people should be able to defend themselves, have a hobby as a hunting, which I'm a little bit less interested in protecting. Doesn't mean I want to take your guns away for that, but I just feel like it's weird to always lead with that. But whatever, do what you want to do. But some of us are going to judge you. But also, we want people to be safe and not have accidental deaths or suicides. And obviously, we all want to reduce homicides and mass instances of mass violence. Everyone pretty much agrees on those things. There are some people that say that the world would be safer without guns, and those people are right. Obviously, no one disagrees with that either. It's just, we have the world that we have, and that is, we have a difference between our dreams and expressed visions and immediate goals, and that's all that is. It's really not that complicated. We act like these things are in conflict, but they're not. Like, I also want a world that's safer, where we're not killing each other in the streets over parking spaces or because somebody broke up with you. And I also don't want cops shooting people because they have their gun owner, and so we need to have some legislation to make as safe of a world as we can, but also make people feel, some of that is people want to feel safe, and for some people, owning a weapon makes them feel safe, and that's not unfair. I just think that people should be fully educated on the risk of owning firearms, especially if you have children, and the responsibilities of owning a firearm should be encoded and be universal and not be state by state, city by city, county by county. And I was mostly joking about judging you if you're a hunter. If you want to hunt and you're going to eat the deer or whatever, I get it. That's fine. You shouldn't use a, AR-14 or AK-47 or Tour Mountain machine gun or something to hunt deer, because that's stupid and wasteful and dangerous, and you can accidentally kill people. We want to reduce that. If you're just going to shoot the animal and leave it there, I will judge you, because that's just wasteful and mean. And why are you doing that? Why did you shoot Bambi? So some of the practical things that I think we can do. I forget if it's Chris Rock or Chris Tucker, but one of them has a joke about if we just tax bullets at like $400 or 400% or something, I forget the number, we prevent all mass shootings. And he was joking, but it's also, it's accurate. If you really, obviously there's crimes of passion and where you're just angry and you just shoot people and don't really think about the consequences, which is why making the consequences worse doesn't actually change behavior. But if you had to think about it a little bit more, maybe you'd buy fewer bullets. So adding a bullet tax actually would pay for a lot of the gaps in funding that we have, and possibly have small marginal benefits for reducing how those bullets are used. So add a special tax on bullets. The money earned would be used to subsidize the cost of mental health services and victim services. I had a woman in this program that I was working in COVID, where we were trying to basically keep people housed and pay any weird expenses that came up during COVID. She actually called in partially because, COVID, but partially because she was a victim of gun violence, but she wasn't the target, which came up. Her neighbor was, and her car got shot up, and it ruined the engine. And she was calling because victims services wouldn't pay to fix the car. They recommended that she call 211, which managed all those programs and resources and information sharing. And so called, I picked up, she tells the story, and she wasn't harmed, but the car again was totaled. And so I think eventually we were able to partially help her fix her car, and she needed her car to get to work. And so, like, it was a whole thing. But victim services originally said no because they have to be really stringent with their money. And normally they give money to direct victims of crimes. Like if you've been personally injured, like if she had gotten shot in the leg, she would be eligible for payment. But the payment might not have even been enough to fix the injury. And so she probably would have just had to eat those costs. And victim services are always underfunded, even if you have like Republicans that get up and say we need to be tough on crime, we care about the victims. And it's like if you cared about the victims, you would just put this money that you would normally put for the police department into victim services and such. But they don't. So I also think of the same around the same. Well, I think we should make the cost of newly bought gun safes and trigger locks and lock boxes should be fully tax deductible to promote safe storage practices. There's some states that will charge a parent with involuntary manslaughter and or neglect if their kid finds their loaded weapon and the worst happens. Um, and I don't know, they've already lost their kid. I don't know if sitting in jail is going to be worse punishment than that. And not that everything should even come down to punishment, but also I am of the strange opinion that it's more important to prevent that from happening than punishing the parent for it happening. So we just need to make it easier for parents to store their guns and promote that. And right now we're really leaving it to nonprofits to educate people on the dangers of that. And some police departments, to be fair, do give out free trigger locks and I don't know any of off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's a police department somewhere that helps get gun safes. Maybe not, or lock boxes. I do think I remember there being some police departments in Florida and Texas that give out lock boxes, but maybe that's not true. Maybe I made that up. But the federal government could easily give a tax break or make it tax deductible or give a tax credit for buying new gun safes and such. We should also have a national firearm registry for all official sales, and we should definitely limit those unofficial sales. And you're like, oh no, this is scary. The government's going to know what guns I have. And the government already knows what guns you have, especially if they're some of the bigger ones. Like, the ATF currently isn't allowed to have a computerized registry and talk to other agencies about you buying those firearms and stuff. But if you fly on a plane and you have to notify TSA that you're shipping your gun to Florida because you can't fly on the plane with it, or you bought a gun from Walmart and the post office is delivering it, or you've already been investigated for a crime. Like, there's a federal agency that either knows that you're thinking about buying a gun because the NSA is the NSA and spies on us, or that you've already bought a gun or that you have a gun. And there's just not a legitimate reason for why we can't just have, a registry so that everyone's on the same page. And we could respond differently. Law enforcement can respond differently based on that information. They could perhaps, I don't know, for example, if they had a warrant for someone's arrest and it's unrelated to the weapons chart or the weapons that they have, them knowing that someone has 53 weapons is helpful, I think, especially if it's something like the Bundy Ranch situation or something. It's nice to know that, this place you're going is fully armed. But on the other hand, it's also just nice if there's a manhunt for someone and after a mass shooting, or someone is, I don't know, it's a nice preventative measure that doesn't have to just be for law enforcement or just be for investigations, but it is really useful for investigations, especially in cases of missing or stolen firearms. Knowing where those originated and being able to track them down is just helpful. And plenty of other countries, most other countries, have some kind of registry. Um, and we can always talk through what that looks like, how public that information should be from like our end, because there's some dangers around that. Like you might make yourself a target if there's a national registry that like your neighbors can see, and they can see that you bought a new gun, and you might have interest in going to steal it and sell it because guns are quite expensive and easy to sell and easy to steal. We should have a ban on police departments selling their old firearms. There's been a lot of cases where old firearm that was used, an old firearm that was a police department was used in a crime after they sold it, and then it just complicated things because a lot of times in an investigation they'll exclude DNA or weapons owned by like, cops and stuff, or they'll see, oh, this is a weapon, it matches this, and it's like, oh, was this a police officer? This, like, no, they just sold their weapon. And it's just, we can get rid of like quirks like that and just instances of people being able to get guns really easily by just preventing police departments from being able to sell their old firearms. Just melt them down, repurpose them, do the things. We should institute a dealers and collectors license for those who own more than 3 firearms. We and require a safe storage class, a fee, and annual reporting on any lost, sold, stolen, or gifted firearms. That goes back with the registry, just making sure we know where these weapons ended up and where they started it. So we don't have all these guns just ending up on the street or in Mexico or all these places where guns just disappeared or were stolen or whatever. And people should, if you want to collect 50 guns, I guess that's fine. That's excessive in my opinion, but you should have to learn how to properly store and possibly use those weapons. And you should also probably have to pay for that. And, you're just more of a risk to the community. Not saying that you might, use those guns, but, your kids might, or, your kids' friends might be like, hey, this is where I can get guns. Because traditionally, that's what's happened in a lot of mass shootings. The kids steal their parents' weapons, or parents' friend, or their friend's parents. In Columbine case, they were able to steal some of their parents or some of their friends' parents' weapons, and also have older child buy a weapon for them. And it was pretty easy, and that's happened in a bunch of other school shootings, and we could prevent that. Assault weapons ban or regulation, if we're not going to fully ban it, we could at least require a license for it, and ban in cities. Bullets travel, they go through walls. Apartments are usually built pretty shoddy and are not bulletproof, so if you use this for home defense, you're going to probably kill your neighbors. That's bad. Or if you're outside shooting it off, same thing. You're going to hurt somebody else. And while I am not sold on it being a useful hunting weapon, I mean, if you want to kill Bambi with an AR-14, I guess that would be the place to use it, if not in war. And I know some people just want it to be able to fight off the government, but they still have drones and tanks and sonic weapons and all kinds of stuff, and I just feel like that might not balance the scales. But it is an argument, and I get it. Obviously the government's quite tyrannical right now, and a little bit more amenable to that thought. I'd be fine with a ban, and think that even with a ban, if there was some kind of conflict with the government massacring citizens, it seemed apparently some other country would just give us weapons, as we seem to be thinking about doing with Iran. So there's that too. I think moving on, we should allow citizens and states to sue neighboring states with weaker gun laws for guns bought into those states to use in a crime elsewhere. So a perfect example here, is Maryland has fairly strong gun laws. Not the strongest in the United States, but definitely not the weakest. Um, and honestly, most of those laws seemed aimed at Baltimore. Um, um, whether we like it or not. And DC, until some court cases told them that they couldn't have like the handgun restriction and such, also had really strong laws. But Virginia has relatively weak gun laws, and so if someone buys a gun in Virginia, because it's easier to buy a gun in Virginia than Maryland, and then they come to Maryland and shoot someone, and that's a repeated activity, then the state of Maryland should be able to sue Virginia at least to recoup the costs of medical care and investigation and incarceration. Um, but also, the victims should be able to sue the state of Virginia to recoup some of their costs back too. Maybe we just have the state sue on the victim's behalf, like in insurance. Um, Another popular example is Illinois, where Chicago is, should be able to sue Indiana, where a lot of residents of Illinois get their guns because, again, the city of Chicago and then the state of Illinois has pretty good gun laws, but the states around them have pretty weak gun laws. And they argue that because of hunting and, freedom, I guess, they should be able to buy guns without any real barriers and any responsibility. And I think that's silly. You should have some responsibility if someone in your state or someone in a different state even goes to your state to buy the guns and then go across state lines and kill someone. Right now, the system we currently have, Virginia and Indiana, in these examples, though they're not the only ones, are benefiting economically from the sales, and then they're not having to pay any of the costs that are occurring elsewhere. We should just, right size that. And it's a pretty easy thing to tell people and understand, and it doesn't actually change. It doesn't change anyone's ability to buy weapons. It just changes, liability and where the money comes from to investigate and treat people. And I think that's a pretty easy thing to pass, even in the next 2 years, as a standalone bill. Though obviously I'd like that all of these things pass at the same time. We should also restore funding for community-based violence intervention programs. Trump, for whatever reason, removed some of that funding, or let Doge remove some of that funding. I think he just didn't read that, didn't understand it, but I don't feel like he would stand in the way of restoring funding for that. He wants to take credit for reducing violence. This would allow him to actually do that, even if it would just fundamentally be returning to, a Biden level norm. But, you take the ones where you can get them. I think we should regulate ghost guns with national standards so that everyone's on the same page. Ghost guns, if you aren't aware, are guns that usually you can make at home either through a kit that you can buy or 3D printing through instructions that you can get online. Usually you have to buy the instructions too. But then they often don't come with serial numbers. They don't come with like a manufacturer. Like you don't know what kind of gun it is or who made it or whatever, like on regular guns. And so they're called ghost guns because it's thought that they're harder to trace. And some people dispute that. Some people say it's still pretty easy to trace them once you're trained on that. But we can definitely regulate. And part of that could be just training police departments to figure out how to spot them and figure out where they came from and who used it. But we could also just make manufacturers, even the ones that make those kits, be able to do more. And there's always going to be somebody that's smart enough to know how to just make a gun and with 3D printing and not. And, that's just part of technology. But we can make it harder. We can make it so that children can't figure it out and, shoot up a school. In that same line, we can require firearms to have microstamping technology so that it actually stamps the bullet, so that you can figure out if someone shot, or if you find a bullet, you can find out what kind of gun it was used in pretty easily, and then match that gun easier. That's something that law enforcement has asked for, and in this case, I think they're right. This one sounds weird, but it's come up a few times recently. We should ban betting platforms from being able to let people profit, and they shouldn't be able to profit off of mass violence. The shooting at Brown University, you were actually able to bet on aspects of the shooting, on what the person looks like, who they were, how long it would take to catch them, things of that. And then I've seen in some places proposals, at least. I don't know if they actually made it on Polymarket or not, but it's illegal for them to. For like, how many days can the U.S. go without a mass shooting, and how many days between, like, assassination attempts and stuff like that. Like, we shouldn't let that happen. The obvious reason is because we have so many guns and we have so many people in the U.S., someone could make a bet and then just influence that decision by going to shoot up a school or shooting the person, or doing such things. And that's just kind of gross. It's just like, we shouldn't let people just so nakedly profit off of violence. That's just it promotes violence, and it's just wrong. We shouldn't allow that. We should require gun owners to report missing or stolen firearms within 24 hours of noticing, or pay a pretty large fine. Repeated cases should have some kind of suspension of being able to buy new weapons. There are some people who buy guns and just let them go missing so that people can have a gun that's traceable or not tied to them. And that's irresponsible, and obviously it leads to more people dying. And that's a pretty easy thing to solve. You can't make it so strict, because sometimes people just legit don't notice if they have too many. But that goes back to the collector's license and stuff. You have to have some system in place and some training so that just doesn't happen as much. But it shouldn't be so strict that people are like arrested because because they're a victim of a crime. It's just sometimes in these situations they're not actually a victim of a crime. They're just claiming they didn't notice that their weapon was missing or someone stole it. But if someone breaks into your car and steals your firearm, you shouldn't be arrested. You also shouldn't leave your firearm visible in your seat, or someone is probably going to steal it. We should allow gun manufacturers to be sued. Right now, there's a carve out for them, protecting them from lawsuits. And we should limit advertising near schools and in cities. Okay, so that's gun violence prevention, and tying it into it, and I've mentioned some of these a little bit, but criminal justice reform. We should abolish the death penalty. That also should be pretty easy to do, even if people think it's not. We've had a lot of positive movement on this in just the last 5 years, but even before that, there's been lots of states, like Maryland in 2012 or 2013 abolished the death penalty on a state level. And the federal government's been really inconsistent with the death penalty. They've had moratoriums more often than not in the last 50 years, where they didn't put anyone to death. Trump, during his first term, sped up the process and killed a lot of people. At least 3 of them who were thought to be innocent in his last few days. And Biden, in his last few days, commuted everyone on federal death row, for lack of better terms, to a life sentence. I think, except for Dylan Roof, and then I think he was also eventually commuted. Though I would fact check that one. So either all or everyone but one was immediately put into life. And I think Last time I checked, there was no one on federal death row. Trump's obviously promised to, execute people if they end up committing a crime that they get convicted of, and death penalty is ordered. But death penalty is very arbitrary, even if it was given out fairly, and it never has been. It's always been they give it out more to people of color, especially if the victim is white, especially if the victim is white and female, and the defendant is black and male. But it's also just not. There's some people that have been on death row for 20 years, and there's some people that are on death row for 2 years. There's some people that have mental deficiencies or disabilities that or mental disorders that make it very unlikely that they understood the consequences of their actions. There's some people, and we've long gotten away from executing children, at least directly. And so there's also, some would argue, age discrimination. If you murder someone before you turn 18, we no longer are going to execute you, which I think is a good thing. Some people disagree, but then that just means everyone 18 and on are eligible from the death penalty, not every person that commits a certain crime. And then obviously there's some states that don't have the death penalty. So if you commit a crime in Maryland, no death penalty, but if you cross the border over into Virginia, which actually, let me fact check to see if I think Virginia also got rid of their death penalty. But let's say you went down to Florida, which does still have a death penalty. Yes, okay, Virginia abolished the death penalty in 2021, relatively recently. I'm giggling because AI claims that Virginia is a southern state. I disagree. But whatever. 2021, which is interesting because that means Republican governor signed it into law, getting rid of capital punishment. But regardless, if you commit a crime up here and then you went down to Florida and committed the same crime, there's 2 different punishments, and that's also unequal. Like, we're in the United States of America. We shouldn't have the maximum penalty for a crime being different state by state. That is why we have a republic system. We have some things that should be the same no matter what. And I personally think it's enough to just say that the state shouldn't have the authority to kill people, because the state shouldn't have the authority to kill people. That's crazy and leads to so many problems. Like, we understand that ICE shooting someone in the head in the street for protesting is wrong. I think the same thing is true for, someone shooting someone in the head in a firing squad as a means of execution. They're still the state either way, whether you think it's justified in one and not justified in the other because someone, hurt someone. But the punishment of killing someone because they killed someone because murder is wrong, it's just not doesn't make sense. But if you don't like the moral argument, that's fine. There's also the financial aspect of it, and the liability aspect of it. If the state kills someone and they turn out to be innocent and that's provable, then the state's out a lot of money. They've incarcerated this person for years and spent millions of dollars and fighting appeals and feeding them and offering medical care, and then the process of actually killing someone is also expensive. But now they have to shell out money to this victim's family as like, oops, we messed up. Fighting for a different amount, and the amount's different in every state too. Some states have made it so the most you can pay, they've capped the amount that you can pay out to prevent going bankrupt because they made a mistake, which is crazy. It's like, how many mistakes do you expect to make? Even if you don't make a mistake, even if there's irrefutable evidence that someone did something, and that, in my mind, doesn't exist. We thought it was DNA, and there's been mishaps with that too. We thought it was video cameras, and with AI and deep fakes and stuff, we see that that might not be as foolproof as we thought. Eyewitness testimony is equally as faulty. You know, there's some stuff that people have been convicted on, and it's just made up branches of science with no one. Um, it's just made up. Like there's not a body that's set down and can validate it. Like smell experts, like deaf smell experts, totally made up. Um, Bite mark experts, totally made up. Blood spatter analysis, totally made up. But people have been put to death based off of these. Um, Same with jailhouse snitches, where someone claims to have heard someone give some evidence, like say you have a cellmate and they have been bragging about murdering the person that they're being prosecuted for murdering, and then that person that claims to have heard that just happens to get a reduced sentence. Just abolish the death penalty. Life in prison is still, in my mind, probably cruel and unusual in many cases. But it's a fine alternative. And there's also just a messiness that there's no ethical way to kill people. And the methods that we've landed on, we have to buy medicine that usually is used to help people and different chemicals that, again, used in different purposes, and either have to torture someone to make it as painful as possible, or we're essentially, using medicine in ways that they're legally not supposed to be able to be used, and opens up the companies that make that medicine and the state to liability. And it's just a mess. Just get rid of it. Abolish the death penalty. That's it. Wouldn't take a constitutional amendment. The Sixth Amendment, I believe, already says that you can't have cruel and unusual punishment, and we've taken that to mean, even if you take that to mean what was cruel and unusual at that time, well, that excludes all the things, all the technology that didn't exist back then. And it would also exclude, at least in some jurisdictions, hanging and the firing squad and drowning and drawing and quartering and stuff. And it would just drastically reduce the options. But also, I think we're smart enough to know that cruel and unusual means cruel and unusual. It's what is unusual now is if half the states don't use the death penalty or it's been abolished, which is the current case. Then functionally that means only some people are held to a standard that we shouldn't have in the first place. So we should skip around a little bit. I want to come back to one. Limit the cases that public defenders can have per month. Right now they're overworked, overloaded, and we should make it, give them a reasonable caseload, and also increase the funding of public defenders' offices. We need to right size the justice system. Right now, prosecutors come in and they have the advantage, and there's even the public defenders in a lot of jurisdictions work in the same building as the prosecutors, and they have a vested interest that if they have been given 25 cases and the prosecutor has been given 6 that week, to settle as many of those cases as they can and just take a plea deal. And since their client has to sign off on this, they have a vested interest in withholding some information and lying to their clients, or just pressuring their clients into taking the plea deal, whether their clients did anything or not. More money would solve some of those problems, and limiting how many cases the public defenders can have per month and per year would greatly solve a lot of that. Gideon's Promise is an organization that talks about a lot of these things. So if you're interested in more information about that specific issue, they've given a lot of videos on YouTube and on their website about that. So I would check them out. Mandate body cameras be worn by police officers, and then build out a system for storage and access by the public. So we're all on the same page, no matter what jurisdiction you're in. Just make a federal standard and hold them to that standard. Make sure they can't get any federal funds if they don't hold to that standard, and then have automatic consent decrees if they violate those standards, and have those consent decrees have some teeth. Like they have to pay if they are not doing the one job that they have, which is securing the public with the public's help. If they are instead, you know, doing crimes against the public, then there's be some consequences for that. And for those consequences to happen, we need to end qualified immunity. Police officers would still have plenty of power and plenty of protections, but they shouldn't have unlimited power and unlimited protection. We should also subsidize the pay of officers and set minimum pay rates. In many jurisdictions, they are still paid far, far too low. And we should also restrict the jobs that they're allowed to do while they're sworn officers. And limit how much overtime they can get too. Like, if there's this much overtime, you just need to hire an extra officer. And especially if they're working 60-hour weeks and the crime rate's not changing, and it's just like, that's just grift. Raise the minimum, get rid of all that stuff. We don't need stressed out officers that aren't sleeping enough, and should probably go home and hang out with your kids. We should also restrict the hiring of officers fired in other districts for excessive force. Famously, in the case of the officer that shot Khyre Edwards, he did end up getting fired from his job, and I forget if that was Cleveland or somewhere around in Ohio. But he just went to a neighboring jurisdiction, and they hired him, and there was no problems. That definitely should be illegal. We definitely should ban that. If you shot someone in this jurisdiction, you're not magically better able to be a police officer in this one. We didn't ban that. Because it has an unfortunate name for it that they refer to them as gypsy cops or kangaroo cops, where they're like bouncing around or they're like nomads. So I don't like the name, but that is the term for it. We should also, last two things, and then I'm done with this video for today. We should end cash bail. Either the person is too dangerous to leave jail or they're not. How much money a person has should not dictate their freedom. I don't know why Democrats don't have the balls to just say that. It's not complicated. Cash bail is a problem, and lots of people agree with that. And if judges deem someone a flight risk or too dangerous, then they would just keep them in jail until trial anyways. And there's a process for their defense attorney to keep appealing to try to get them out. And that's fine. But right now, we're only keeping the cash bail system legal because bail bondsmen have put millions of dollars into lobbying to maintain it. It doesn't make them safer. It doesn't actually increase the chances that they'll show up for trial. The rates are the same, and places that have gotten rid of cash bail have reduced the cases that it's used and have had it unchanged. The fact is, if you charge someone $200,000 and they leverage their house, but they've been charged with murder and they know that the evidence is overwhelming, there's no cost you can put on freedom. They can still leave if they've been able to pay the money. Alternatively, if the bail is $2,000, but they can't make $2,000 even if they worked every day for the next 3 months because they make minimum wage and they owe too much money to too many different people, then they're still not able to get out of jail. So get rid of cash bail. The last thing, close to my heart, juvenile justice reform. We should start with the name. It's crazy that we've come up with a term to make us forget that these are children. Because if you say, hey, I locked up 10 kids for skipping school, that sounds crazy. But if you say I locked up 10 juveniles for skipping school for truancy, then that sounds slightly more reasonable. But part of that reform would include more protections in detention centers. Look up the honey buns for for a crime story that honey bun fighting ring story that the Miami Herald did about 10 years back. It's a crazy story. Basically, the prison guards were betting on fights in juvenile detention centers and forcing these kids to fight each other and paying them with treats like honey buns. Probably shouldn't be legal. Probably shouldn't. Probably should be easier to prosecute officers that do that. And there should be fewer people in the detention centers. We should also reduce the punishments for youth committing status crimes. Status crimes kind of make sense, but mostly for the adults, less for the kids. Adults shouldn't be able to assault children. That's a big reason why we have status crimes, where we have legal ages where adults cannot sleep with, children. And obviously, looking at the Epstein files, they do it anyways, but we shouldn't get rid of that. But just because a kid's 15, we shouldn't be able to put them in jail for skipping school. We need to work with the parents and the community to figure out why they're skipping school, and if we can just, do a virtual school option or something, or if there's another intervention, if there's bullying or abuse at home, and figure that out. We should not incarcerate the kids or the parents, because some jurisdictions do that, or fine them for not being able to go to school. We should try to get them to go to school, but we shouldn't have the criminal justice be responsible for that. And then also drug and alcohol possession. Yeah, I don't want kids to be drunk, but we shouldn't arrest them for it. We should encourage them to go to substance abuse counseling and encourage them not to start. But our drinking culture in America is really bad, and that's not the kids' fault. We shouldn't arrest them for that. And curfews. Curfews are dumb. They don't work. They just punish kids for existing in a space and not being a certain age. And I don't think that's constitutional, shouldn't be legal, and it shouldn't be our primary tool. I hope this was helpful, and I hope to do a similar video in depth for the other two planks of my platform, which again is liberation and excuse me, and affordability. And I will do lots of short videos to explain some of these things as well and to promote this out. But I do think that you deserve a longer version so that you can hear for yourself what I think we should do. And this is still scaled down. Each of these things that I talked about deserves their own video, honestly, probably the same length. And there's lots of people who are experts on each of these things, of which I'm not an expert on each of these things. I read lots of books. I've worked in lots of different industries. I talk to people. I listen to experts, and that's where I came up with some of these things. Most of these I would not say is original ideas, but also I don't think there are many original ideas. And I think that's fine. I think we live in a society where we're supposed to share information and resources and responsibilities as well. As things like joy, if we end up doing something like increasing police pay. I'm not a cop, never will be a cop, doesn't benefit me directly. There's obviously, like I said, some benefits to having cops that are less stressed out and less sleep deprived. But I'll be happy to hear that, some of my friends who became police officers are getting paid more, deserve it. There's something in the Bible talking about weeping when other people are weeping and feeling joy when other people feel joy, and that sticks with me. I think, there's a lot of discourse on the right talking about toxic empathy, which is kind of BS, but it's discouraged people from really thinking about, we should build a system that helps everyone and protects everyone. And then we should also have a system where we feel the failures of the system before they reach us. We have that poem that everyone quotes around the Holocaust, where first it came for the socialists, but I didn't care because I was a socialist. I am a bit of a socialist, and I think that's okay. But we hear that, and then sometimes we bring it to the current situation we're in, and sometimes we don't. But it's evergreen and always comes up because, things haven't really changed. Like, people are still pretty mostly because of the system that we have of capitalism and hyper individualism that we have in America. That's why we're so car dependent and less high speed rail. Um, but we just are going to keep perpetuating these harms and ignoring things because unless we are personally impacted, sometimes we just can't afford to care, which is why I'm going to do a 2-hour video on affordability next. Or we just can't be bothered to care because, yes, this is really heavy, but what can we do about it? One easy thing you can do is vote in your primaries. Maybe you see this and you're not actually in the 4th District of Maryland. That's fine. You didn't waste your time. You have an election this year, too. Every single member of Congress is up for re-election this year, and you have a chance to vote on them. You can also donate to me, would be nice. The link is on my website, Khyre Edwards for Congress.com. You can also go to ActBlue and type in Khyre Edwards, and I can confidently say I am the only Khyre Edwards currently running for office. So that's nice, at least for federal office. You can get out and organize in your community, which you might hear a lot now, and without anyone explaining what that means. In the short version, you just get out, you get some of your neighbors, and you say, hey, here's this problem. I want to get together to fix that problem. And it doesn't always just have to be problem focused either. You can also look at the resources that you have and pull them together and decide to give them out. And that's the same thing, but we call it mutual aid. You can also do something kind of in between and say, hey, here's this problem, here's what we have, let's bring this together, and like maybe we should codify this and maybe make a business, and not whether make it a business or not, but that's more like a co-op. So sometimes people throw away these terms and don't really explain them, and then and to be candid, sometimes they don't explain it because they don't understand. And sometimes it's easy to say we should do these things, even if they're not the solutions. Unions are great, don't get me wrong, but we have a Department of Labor who's supposed to be responsible for maintaining our labor laws and making sure that everyone's rights are held to. And so it's great that Amazon, that there was a union effort at Amazon or Starbucks or in these places. Department of Labor is failing that, A, there needed to be a union effort. And again, unions are great, and sometimes they're going to go well and above the law, like getting more wages and stuff. That's great. But the fact that they had to unionize to get basic worker protections that they already have, but that aren't enforced, is an issue. But people will still point you towards, well, have you joined a union? Which again, is good, and it's a tool. But organizing unions, mutual aid, co-ops are all 4 different tools that are helpful and can bring really meaningful change to everyone. Talk to a union member, and they will proudly and happily, unprompted, talk about how we got the weekend, which is great, and it is how we got the weekend. But we need a all of the above approach, and so you shouldn't burn yourself out trying to figure out what to do, but and doing everything at once. I've definitely been there. Take care of yourself, self-care. It's poo-pooed by the people that need you right now, but even though I would love for you to be my volunteer and donate to me and buy my merch and do all this stuff, you should first take care of you and your neighbors and your household and community, and make sure that you are in the headspace to actually get out and do what you need to do. Protests are great. Protests can be overwhelming, overstimulating, and they can feed into your worst impulses. So personally, get a little personal, I did not go to protests for I did not heavily participate in protests, I should say. I went to plenty of protests still, but I wasn't putting myself on the line or organizing or anything like that for about 3 years, because candidly, I went through a divorce and I was not in a headspace to be in a situation where, you know, you might get into a fight. You have to be at a level of peace and self assuredness and in the community to be actually useful to the community. And some people hear that and they have to wrestle with it, or think that you're being lazy, or think that you are haven't you rested enough? You might have heard over the last year. And some people, yes, some people have rested a lot, and some people confuse rest with apathy. And I don't think you should do that. But get out and join the fight wherever you can, and hopefully that's some way that benefits me. But if not, that's okay too.